Permadeath. If a unit hits 0 HP, they are gone for good. It is a Fire Emblem staple and among the most iconic and infamous features that the series is known for. From a basic gameplay perspective, it makes the game quite punishing and difficult, as the player can possibly pay a huge price for even small mistakes or mishaps. As a result of its drastic impact and effect on the experience, Permadeath often proves divisive between older and newer fans of the series. But today I want to put the flame war aside, and really focus on how Permadeath as a mechanic interacts with Fire Emblem's other systems, as well as analyzing the type of experience that comes about as the result of said interactions. There is more to Permadeath than just its hardcore nature. It provides valuable insight in how to implement mechanics to craft a meaningful gameplay experience. Keep in mind, just because I am praising Permadeath does not mean I am disparaging casual mode or similar features. They too have their time and place, and I'll be sure to make a video on them in the future. But enough preamble, let's delve right into it. Permadeath. A cornerstone of the Fire Emblem experience is the amount of investment the player puts into their characters on both a mechanical and emotional level. Managing experience distribution, optimizing classes and skills, tinkering with team composition, these things take time, effort, and energy to do, and Permadeath's presence creates a vested interest to do them, because the stronger and better organized a player's units are, the less likely they are to bite the dust. This creates a peculiar dynamic, because the more the player invests into these characters, the more they have to lose when death comes knocking at their door. Permadeath forces players to make their units valuable, and then that created value in itself becomes the player's personal stake in the battle. But it's not just stat lines and numbers on the line, because the player isn't just controlling some abstract representation of soldiers, they are commanding characters. Unlike many strategy games, the units in Fire Emblem all have names, pasts, relationships, families, and the game gives the player gameplay incentives to learn more about them and develop their bonds with other units. In turn, many players come to care deeply for these characters, not only because they've dumped a ton of resources into them, but because they genuinely like them and enjoy their presence. So not only does the player have a mechanical investment in their units, they have an emotional one as well. As a result, the stakes during battle are nearly as high as they can be, because Permadeath puts those mechanical and emotional connections directly on the chopping block, and the result is surreal. Players treat their units during gameplay as if they were actual people. Players avoid suicidal tactics even in situations where it's strategically viable. They lament the deaths of PNGs. Simply put, they care for these units on a really deep level, not because the game told them to, but because the game crafted an experience where they had to. By putting something the player cares about deeply, directly in the line of fire, it creates a satisfying feeling of relief and even a sense of camaraderie between the player and their units when they do manage to overcome that ultimate adversity. Alright, let's hold our horses before we go too far here, because there's a very clear elephant in the room here. Resetting. Doesn't resetting potentially nullify all of the effects I mentioned in this video so far? I mean, with the press of a button, everything the player lost comes back, so why should Permadeath even be there if players will reset anyways? Well, I really beg to differ on that statement. In fact, I think resetting only reinforces Permadeath's critical role. First of all, why do players reset in the first place? Well, it's because of Permadeath. Players don't want to lose things they are invested in, so to avoid losing them, they reset. So yes, I agree with that fact. They do avoid coping with that loss, and they keep their investment in the character alive. But it isn't as if Fire Emblem hands these things back to the player on a silver platter just because they reset. Resetting comes at a real cost, the player's progress in the chapter. The game doesn't care how far you were in the chapter or how long it took you before a character died. You either lose a unit or you are losing your progress. This creates a compelling dilemma where players have to weigh the value of their own progress against the life of a unit, and this is an extremely meaningful choice to give players. They will be well aware that resetting means potentially losing hours of progress, but on the other hand, that trooping through means losing not only a unit, but in many cases, a friend. The reason this is so potent is because no matter what the player ends up choosing, the life of the unit still retains tangible value. Value that in many players' eyes is worth the price of restarting the chapter, worth losing all of their progress for. Permadeath's presence, whether you reset or not, means that no matter what, the lives of the units are worth something real, something tangible. They either hurt on an emotional and mechanical level to lose, or are worth making personal sacrifices to maintain. And that dynamic only exists at a high level when permadeath is in play. There is one last piece to the permadeath puzzle, and it's an element that most people begin to take issue with when it starts interacting with permadeath, and that's RNG. I missed a 99 and I died, the enemy got a 1% crit, etc, etc. Complaints about this dynamic of chance and permanent death almost always comes back to these three words: it's not fair. And most would be inclined to agree, it isn't fair. But just because something isn't fair doesn't mean it lacks a purpose or role in the experience. Sometimes there are just bad bounces you cannot predict or even prepare for. Even the best generals still lose soldiers. The dynamic that permadeath creates, in tandem with RNG, means that the player is likely at some point during their playthrough, whether they played well or not, is going to have to deal with losing a unit. And yes, that isn't really fair, but the developers felt it was important that death was an ever-present possibility. In reality, battles rarely have deathless victories. You can be as moral as possible and play by the book to a T, but in the end, the battlefield doesn't play favorites. You are most likely going to lose someone. And it is totally understandable why this element frustrates so many. A lot of people play games to have fun. It's a tall order to ask people to digest this kind of loss, especially at the hands of often unfair RNG, during their recreational activity. It's just not for everyone. But for those who are willing to take up the challenge Fire Emblem presents, there is almost no greater emotional experience or thrill in gaming. Through permadeath's relationship with Fire Emblem's RPG elements, character development, and RNG, it makes the player both feel the practical and emotional weight of death on the battlefield, as well as portraying its inevitable and often unfair nature. So few games commit this hard to their design goals to produce such an intense and unique experience. It's rare to see a game tackle this aspect of warfare, the personal stakes, the connections, the luck, the loss, and almost all through mechanics. It lends the overall experience a much needed human and grounded edge that, yes, even in this fantastical world with dragons, magic, and plucky teenagers saving the world, good people still die. War still hurts. Thanks for watching.